They thought it was just another inspection, an old building, a few creaky floors, maybe some mold, a rat or two. Nothing the town hadn't seen before. But what Officer Jenna Brooks and her K-9 partner Dozer found beneath that orphanage would unearth a secret that had been buried for decades. A secret the town of Harrow Creek had tried to forget. And that secret started with a growl. It was supposed to be simple. Harrow Creek was a quiet town, founded in the 1850s, home to one grocery store, a faded post office, and a football team that hadn't won a playoff game since '97. Most of the time, Officer Jenna Brooks found herself issuing speeding tickets or helping old Mr. Crandall track down his runaway goats. So when she was asked to swing by the old Briar Glen Orphanage for a routine safety inspection, she figured it'd be another yawner of a Wednesday. She brought Dozer along mostly out of habit. He was getting up there in years, 7.5 now, but his instincts were still razor-sharp. Once a bomb-sniffing K-9 deployed in Afghanistan, Dozer had saved more lives than Jenna could count. These days, he spent most of his time napping in the squad car or giving side-eye to squirrels at the park. "Come on, partner," Jenna said, opening the back door of her cruiser. "Let's stretch those legs." The orphanage sat at the edge of town, tucked between a dried-up creek and a row of leafless trees that made it feel more forgotten than it was. The building had that eerie, peeling paint charm that only 60 years of Midwest winters could deliver. Briar Glen had been around since the 1950s, taking in kids nobody else would. Foster rejects, trauma cases, abandoned infants. It had a reputation. Not bad exactly, just quiet. Too quiet. The director, a silver-haired woman named Ms. Larrabee, greeted Jenna with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just some minor floor warping near the south hallway," she said, ushering her inside. "It's an old building, you know how it is." Jenna nodded and glanced down at Dozer, who was already sniffing along the faded linoleum. The halls were lined with watercolor paintings, happy stick figures, sunny skies, that sort of thing. But Jenna could feel it in her bones. Something wasn't right. The air was thick, heavy like dust, and something older. As she walked past one of the doors marked South Wing, Restricted Access, Dozer stopped cold. He stared at the wall, ears perked, and let out a low, guttural growl. Jenna froze. "Dozer," she said under her breath. "What is it, boy?" The German shepherd sniffed closer, pawed once at the floor, then backed up and barked. Not loud. Controlled. Intentional. "Probably a squirrel in the crawl space." Ms. Larrabee offered from behind. Her smile was still there, but Jenna could feel the tension in her voice now. "Old buildings attract critters, you know." Jenna forced a polite laugh, but her eyes never left the spot where Dozer had barked. "Mind if I come back and check this room later? Maybe with a heat sensor? Just to rule out anything structural?" Ms. Larrabee hesitated, just for a breath. "Of course. Whatever you need." Jenna made a mental note. South Wing. Dozer's reaction. The delay in Larrabee's answer. It was nothing on paper, but her gut told her everything. Back in the squad car, Jenna scribbled notes into her worn leather notebook. She glanced at Dozer, who sat alert in the passenger seat, tail thumping once every few seconds. "Still sharp as ever," she muttered. The report she filed was bland enough. No obvious code violations, minor structural issues. Follow-up needed. But later that evening, she returned. No lights, no sirens, just her and Dozer, and a crowbar. The orphanage loomed in the moonlight, like something out of an old horror film. The windows were dark. The wind whispered through the trees like it had secrets to tell. Jenna used a back entrance she'd noticed earlier. The alarm system was old, probably didn't even work. She stepped carefully through the south wing hallway, flashlight in one hand, her other resting on the grip of her service weapon. Dozer led the way, nose twitching with focus. He stopped at the same section of wall, then turned and barked again. This time, Jenna didn't hesitate. She knelt and examined the floorboards. They looked normal, same dusty tile, same old finish. But when she tapped them, the sound changed. Hollow. She pried up one board, then another. Beneath the tile was concrete, and in the middle of that concrete was something strange. A thin metal ring, rusted but intact, embedded in the ground like a handle. A hatch? She pulled. It groaned in protest, thick with age and damp. Beneath it, a narrow staircase led into the dark. Hey, if you love stories where brave canines uncover the truth and change lives, make sure to hit that subscribe button to our YouTube channel, Heroes for Animals. We tell real and inspired stories that honor the loyalty, instincts, and courage of our four-legged heroes. Don't miss what happens next. Jenna wasn't easily rattled. She'd served 3 tours in Iraq as an MP, been shot at, chased down gang suspects, even once talked down a suicidal teen on a bridge during a snowstorm. But this staircase gave her pause. She clicked on her flashlight, motioned for Dozer to stay close, and descended. The air changed as soon as she stepped down. Cooler, stale, like it hadn't been touched in years. At the bottom, her light swept across the room. Concrete walls, crumbling insulation, and scattered across the floor, children's toys. A plastic truck missing its wheels. A ragged teddy bear with one button eye. Crayon drawings on the wall, faded but still visible. One showed a house with a sad face. Another, stick figures behind bars. Jenna swallowed. This wasn't a storage room. It was a holding cell. Dozer sniffed toward the far corner and barked. Jenna approached carefully. There, tucked beneath a rotting blanket, was a child's shoe. She picked it up. It was small, worn. Inside, someone had written a name in faded ink. Emily. Jenna's fingers curled around the shoe as something inside her twisted. Memories she didn't like to revisit came rushing back. Foster homes, closed doors, the smell of fear and bleach. She looked at Dozer, who sat perfectly still, watching her. They weren't done here, not even close. This wasn't just about a weird room in a basement. This was something darker, something buried. And Officer Jenna Brooks was going to dig it up. The next morning, Jenna sat alone at the precinct, sipping bad coffee that tasted like burnt popcorn. The sun hadn't even cleared the rooftops, but her thoughts were already buried in that basement. She couldn't shake the image of the child's shoe. She'd logged the evidence, marked the location, and filed an incident note into the system, just enough to cover herself, not enough to trigger attention. Harrow Creek wasn't the kind of town that welcomed digging into its past, and Jenna had learned the hard way that certain stones, once turned, couldn't be put back. She looked down at Dozer, who lay curled at her feet, head resting on his paws. "You knew it wasn't just a squirrel," she said softly, brushing his ear. By 9 a.m. she was back at the orphanage. This time, she came with backup, not another officer, but a county-issued thermal scanner and a crowbar tucked into her coat sleeve. Ms. Larrabee met her at the door again, her smile just a bit tighter than the day before. "You're back early," the director said, folding her arms. "Find anything interesting yesterday?" Jenna gave a nonchalant shrug. "Flooring's a mess down in the south wing. Mind if I take another look before writing it up?" Larrabee hesitated, just long enough for Jenna to read the discomfort behind her eyes. "Be my guest," she finally said, stepping aside. This time, Jenna didn't go straight for the hatch. She walked the halls, speaking quietly to a few of the children. Most were polite, a little guarded. One little girl, maybe 6 years old, peeked up from behind a coloring book and whispered, "Are you here for Emily?" Jenna knelt beside her. "Who's Emily, sweetheart?" The girl blinked, then looked away. "She used to live here, but she cried too much. So they took her downstairs." Before Jenna could ask more, Ms. Larrabee's voice echoed down the hall, sharp and sudden. "Time for lunch, everyone." The kids filed off. Jenna stood there, heart beating just a little faster. Downstairs, Back at the hatch, Jenna knelt and ran the thermal scanner across the concrete. It lit up like a Christmas tree. There were clear variations, temperature dips that suggested airflow, hollow spaces, maybe even passageways extending beyond what she'd seen the night before. "Hell of a basement," she murmured. She pried the hatch open again, this time with more confidence. The air that hit her face was damp and earthy, like wet paper and mildew. Dozer hesitated, then followed her down without a sound. The room was exactly as she'd left it. Scattered toys, old mattresses, walls covered in childish scrawls. But now, in the morning light seeping faintly through the cracks above, she noticed more. A name etched into the wall, Noah. Another tally mark scratched below it. Hundreds of them. She walked deeper into the room. Her flashlight caught something tucked behind a fallen beam. An old metal filing cabinet, half-rusted, almost camouflaged against the concrete. It took effort, but she managed to pry the top drawer open. Inside were manila folders, dozens of them, thin, fragile, and yellowed with time. Jenna pulled one. Patient record. Emily J. Monroe, age 4, admitted May 1984. She opened another. Noah T. Keller, age 6, admitted January 1983. Transferred unknown. No exit date, no forwarding information, no adoption papers. Just the word, transferred. Jenna felt a cold sweat gather at the base of her neck. These weren't just kids with behavioral issues. They were forgotten, buried. And this room wasn't just a punishment cell. It was a place where children were erased. That afternoon, Jenna met with her supervisor, Captain Aldridge. She laid out the photos she'd taken, drawings, names, the shoe. She didn't include the folders yet, not until she knew where Aldridge stood. He looked over the images with a quiet grimace, tapping his pen against the edge of the desk. "Briar Glen's always been off," he said finally. "My cousin was there for 6 months back in the 70s. Wouldn't talk about it afterward." "So we open a formal investigation?" Jenna asked, voice steady. Aldridge hesitated. "Jenna, you know how things work around here. That place has got ties, old donors, church money, a few folks in city council who'd rather let sleeping dogs lie." "I'm not asking," Jenna replied. "I'm telling you. There's evidence of child endangerment, possible cover-ups, maybe even worse." Aldridge sighed. "You want to write it up, go ahead. But don't expect the town to thank you for stirring the pot." That night, Jenna sat on her porch with a beer in hand and Dozer at her feet. The air smelled like pine and cut grass. Fireflies blinked out in the field beyond her fence. She opened Emily's file again. Photos were paper-clipped to the back, grainy images of a tiny girl with pigtails and haunted eyes. Her notes described emotional distress, difficulty sleeping, and frequent complaints about being cold. There were no mentions of parents, no visitors logged, no updates after November 1984. Just one final note scribbled in a different hand. "Move to B12. Observations ended." Jenna flipped the page. That's when she saw it. A rough hand-drawn map of the orphanage basement. 2 connected rooms, a long hallway, and a chamber marked B12. She returned again the next morning. This time, Dozer led her to a narrow crawl space in the basement's far corner. The wall had a faint crack running along it, hidden behind stacked furniture. With effort, Jenna moved the debris and found a sealed door with a broken lock. She kicked it open. Inside was another room, smaller, darker, colder. Mold crept along the ceiling. In the corner was a mattress, rotted and sunken. On the wall were more crayon drawings, but these were different. No happy skies, no flowers, just dark shapes. Stick figures with X's for eyes. A small figure behind bars, arms raised. Jenna crouched and ran her fingers along the floor. There it was again, etched into the cement this time. Noah was here. Emily too. Her stomach turned. This wasn't punishment. It was imprisonment. Back at the precinct, Jenna opened up the remaining folders from the cabinet. Names, ages, notes scribbled in cold clinical terms. Non-compliant. Screaming episodes. Withholding food effective. Isolation resulted in improved behavior. Each file told the same story. A child enters Briar Glen. The child doesn't behave. The child is sent below. Then nothing? And these weren't from the 1940s or some distant time. Some were dated as recently as 1993. That evening, Jenna made a call. She found a name in one of the files. Marcy Ellen Reed, now 42 years old, adopted from Briar Glen in 1987. No forwarding address, but a social security number led to an address in Indianapolis. Jenna left a voicemail. "Hi, Marcy. My name's Jenna Brooks. I'm a police officer from Harrow Creek. I believe you may have lived at Briar Glen Orphanage in the late 80s. I'm trying to find out what happened there. Please, call me back. It's important." She didn't know if Marcy would call, but she knew one thing. If someone like Marcy survived that place, she might be the key to understanding what really happened to Noah, and what other names had been buried with him. For the next 2 days, Jenna Brooks couldn't shake the voices. Whispers from that underground room. Silent screams etched in crayon. The scrawled name Noah still haunted her like an unfinished sentence. She kept the files spread across her dining room table. Dozens of brittle manila folders from the basement of Briar Glen Orphanage, all with the same pattern. Children marked as difficult, shuffled into isolation, and then erased. The further she read, the more horrifying it became. Some records listed only first names. Others were scratched out entirely. Dates ended abruptly. Many bore a final note stamped in red. Transferred, no follow-up required. Transferred to where? And why were there no adoption records? Jenna sipped lukewarm coffee and flipped another folder. Her hand stilled at the name, Noah T. Keller, age 6. His intake form was brief. No photo. Just a scribbled comment in the margin. Refuses to speak, possibly mute. Cries when lights are turned off. Her chest tightened. She glanced across the room at Dozer, who lay quietly near the sliding glass door, watching birds hop along the fence. "Did they just leave them down there?" she whispered. The silence was answer enough. That afternoon her phone rang. An Indianapolis number. She snatched it up. "Jenna Brooks!" A voice, tentative, wary. "This is Marcy. You left a message about Briar Glen." Jenna sat straighter. "Yes, thank you for calling. I know this might be hard, but—" "I remember everything," Marcy interrupted. There was no emotion in her tone, just cold fact. "I was 6 when they locked me down there." Jenna met Marcy Ellen Reed in person the next day at a modest diner just off the interstate. She arrived early, nursing a coffee as rain streaked down the window beside her booth. Dozer sat in the cruiser outside, nose pressed to the glass. Marcy entered precisely at noon. Late 40s, dark curly hair pulled into a low bun, denim jacket over a faded flannel shirt. She looked like someone who'd built a quiet life and didn't enjoy revisiting the past. "Officer Brooks," she said, sliding into the booth. "You brought files?" "I did," Jenna replied, pushing a folder across the table. "But I'd rather hear it from you, if you're ready." Marcy stared at the folder for a long moment before opening it. Inside were copies of her intake form, a grainy photo, and handwritten notes from 1987. "They called me high-strung," she said with a bitter laugh. "What does that even mean for a kid who just lost both her parents?" Jenna didn't answer. She let the silence do the work. "They put me in B12 the second week I was there. Said I cried too much. Said I didn't make friends. I remember the smell, damp wood, mildew, and the dark. They left the lights off to encourage obedience." Marcy paused, then added softly, "It wasn't just me. I remember others. A boy named Noah. He used to sing." Jenna's heart jumped. "Sing? In the vents, real soft. I never saw him. But at night, when everything was quiet, I'd hear him humming, something like a lullaby. He said it helped him not feel alone." Marcy blinked, hard. Then one day, the humming stopped. Back at the precinct, Jenna updated her case file and labeled it Briar Glen, Phase 2, Confirmed Isolation Practices. She included Marcy's testimony and excerpts from the basement files. She took the new findings to Captain Aldridge. He didn't look up as she dropped the folder on his desk. "Brooks, we're not the FBI. What do you expect us to do? Shut down the place over a few memories and some dusty folders?" She leveled her gaze. "There are bones down there, sir. I don't need the FBI. I need a warrant to exhume and investigate." Aldridge sighed and rubbed his temples. "You're kicking a hornet's nest." "No," Jenna said. "I'm trying to find children who were thrown away like trash." He glanced at her, saw something in her eyes that made him reach for the paperwork. "Fine, but I want everything by the book. One misstep and the whole case folds." Jenna nodded, understood. That night, she couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but wind thrashed the trees outside her window. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, flipping through the file on Noah again. One note caught her attention. "Attempts to escape on 3 occasions. Shows extreme fear of being alone." Her mind drifted back to Marcy's story. The singing, the silence, the crayon drawings. She remembered one particular picture in the basement. 2 stick figures holding hands under a sunless sky. One labeled me, the other Noah. She picked up her phone and texted Marcy. "Did you ever write to Noah after adoption?" The reply came a minute later. "I tried, but they said he was transferred. Wouldn't say where." Jenna returned to the orphanage the next day with her warrant in hand. She was met not by Ms. Larrabee, but by a thin, balding man in a beige sweater vest who introduced himself as the board's legal liaison. "I'm afraid this is a private facility," he said, trying to block her path. Jenna held up the warrant. "Not anymore." She entered with a full team, 2 deputies, a forensic tech, and Dozer, who was already sniffing his way toward the crawl space. The hatch was sealed again. Someone had bolted it shut from the inside. Jenna didn't wait. She pried it open and descended first. Everything was as they left it, except something new. The cabinet was gone. So were half the drawings. "Someone's been down here," she muttered. Dozer growled at the far wall. Behind a pile of decaying furniture, they found a second hatch. This one even older, almost completely covered in dust and insulation. Jenna pulled it open. A tunnel, low, cramped, and winding. It stretched under the building like a buried vein. At the far end, they found a locked iron door. Jenna's heart pounded as she pushed it open. Inside was a room no bigger than a closet. Chains on the wall. A rusted cot. Scratched words etched into the plaster. "No one is coming. I don't want to disappear. Mom, please find me." She sank to her knees. Who the hell would build something like this under a children's home? Dozer whimpered and nudged her shoulder. "We're gonna find him," she whispered. "We're gonna find them all." That evening, Jenna stood at the edge of a field just outside Harrow Creek. A farmer had called about weird noises coming from an old drainage pipe that fed into the orphanage's foundation. It was sealed with concrete, but poorly. A forensic team drilled through. Inside were bones. Small ones. Dozens. The county coroner took over. The news spread fast. For the first time in decades, people in town were talking about Briar Glen, and not in the way the board of directors would have liked. And yet, Noah was still missing. No confirmed remains, no official record, no photo. Just his name, just a lullaby in the dark. When Jenna Brooks walked into the Harrow Creek diner the next morning, people stopped talking. It wasn't hostile, just quiet, watchful. Half the town had probably seen the news reports. The headlines were everywhere now. Basement bones found under Indiana orphanage. Harrow Creek horror. Dozens of remains unearthed. What happened beneath Briar Glen? Jenna didn't want the spotlight. She didn't even want coffee. But she needed a place to sit, think, and sort through what came next. The evidence was stacking up faster than the system could keep up. Dozer lay at her feet, eyes on the door like he was waiting for the next threat. Jenna wasn't sure he was wrong. The waitress, a girl no older than 20, set down her mug. "That's your dog, right? The one that found the room?" Jenna nodded. The girl hesitated. "My mom says those kids didn't deserve what happened to them. She remembers Briar Glen. She says she almost ended up there herself." That hit harder than Jenna expected. She thanked the girl, dropped a few bucks on the table, and stepped outside. The courthouse was a different story. Jenna had barely made it 2 steps in before a man in a tailored navy suit intercepted her. Thin, tan, mid-50s, and too smooth to be local. "Officer Brooks," he said, flashing credentials. "Roger Fallon, State Review Board. I've been asked to provide legal oversight as this situation develops." Jenna arched a brow. Oversight or obstruction? Fallon smiled like she'd just told a bad joke. "We want to ensure no missteps are made. This is a sensitive matter. The orphanage is run by a private trust with state contracts. We'd prefer to avoid unnecessary panic or litigation." She folded her arms. "You mean you want this quiet?" "I mean, we want it handled professionally. Discretion benefits everyone." Jenna stared at him. "Tell that to the children buried in your basement." He didn't flinch, just nodded politely and walked off. Dozer, at her side, let out a soft growl. "Yeah," Jenna muttered. "I don't like him either." That afternoon, Jenna received an anonymous letter. No return address. No name. Just a folded sheet of paper with a note written in shaky handwriting. "I worked at Briar Glen in '85. I saw things. I can't stay quiet anymore. If you want answers, come alone. Tonight, 10 p.m., the old chapel." It could have been a prank, or worse, a trap. But Jenna didn't hesitate. She loaded her service weapon, packed a flashlight, and took Dozer with her. The old chapel stood on the edge of the orphanage property, long abandoned. Ivy crept up the brick walls. The roof sagged in the middle. The front doors groaned open with a sound like a wounded animal. Inside, dust danced in the flashlight beam. Jenna moved carefully, Dozer leading the way. A figure sat at the front pew, older, hunched, wearing a wool coat despite the warm night. He turned as she approached. Early 70s, maybe. Gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and eyes that hadn't slept in weeks. "I thought maybe you wouldn't come," he said. "I'm here," Jenna replied. "You wrote the note?" He nodded. "Name's Clarence Miller. I was a custodian. Started in '84, worked nights." She sat down a few feet away. Dozer sat between them. "I never hurt no kids," Clarence said quickly. "But I saw things, heard things. They didn't call it punishment. They called it behavioral redirection." He swallowed hard. "They had rules. Quiet kids got adopted. Loud kids got locked up. If you asked too many questions, they said you weren't a team player." Jenna opened a small notebook. "You ever see a child named Noah Keller?" Clarence nodded. "Yeah, little guy. Barely talked. Always drawing. Used to sneak him graham crackers when no one was looking." "What happened to him?" Clarence looked down. "One night, he tried to run. Got out the hatch, made it past the yard. They caught him. Next morning, his name was off the board. Nobody talked about him again." "Did you ask?" "They said he was transferred, but I heard Ms. Groves, the head nurse, screaming at someone that they went too far. She left the next day." Jenna leaned in. "You think he died down there?" Clarence nodded. "If not that night, then soon after." Jenna's hands tightened into fists. Clarence looked up. "You're the first one to ever ask." The next day, Jenna pulled Groves's file. Margaret Groves, former RN. Left Briar Glen abruptly in 1985. No official reason listed. It took a few hours, but Jenna tracked down a current address. Groves was living in a senior complex 2 towns over. She went in person. Margaret Groves answered the door slowly, cautious. She was in her 80s now. Small, frail. When Jenna explained who she was, Groves paled. "You're here about Briar Glen." Jenna nodded. "I need the truth." Margaret's eyes welled up. I tried to stop them, I did. But they had a system. Children that were difficult, they weren't seen as people anymore. They were problems to be contained. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a photo. A boy with dark curls and wide, frightened eyes. "Noah," she said, "that was the last picture I ever saw of him." Jenna held back tears. "Do you know what happened?" Groves shook her head. "I was told to stop asking. I was reassigned to a psych hospital in Ohio the next week. They said my concern was compromising." She gripped Jenna's arm. "Find him, please. Someone has to tell the truth." Back in Harrow Creek, things were changing. Reporters began camping outside the precinct. Protesters stood at the orphanage gates with signs that read, "Children deserve justice," and shut it down. And Jenna was officially told by the department to step back from the case. They cited public optics, said it was above her jurisdiction now. She didn't argue. She just made copies of every file she had, backed them up to the cloud, and forwarded everything to a federal child welfare investigator in Chicago. If they thought they could bury this again, they were wrong. That night, her squad car was keyed. 4 long scratches across the driver's side. A dead rat left on the windshield. Dozer growled when he smelled it. Jenna didn't flinch. She filed the report, but she knew the message. Stop digging. Instead, she dug deeper. She found out who funded Briar Glen, a local philanthropy trust that hadn't filed proper financials in years. The board included local judges, business owners, even a former state senator. They all claimed ignorance, said the basement was unauthorized, called it a relic of an old era. But the truth was darker. The trust had been receiving additional funding for special needs containment. The language was vague, but the numbers were clear. Children were being paid for, not adopted, warehoused. Late that night, Jenna sat on her porch, files spread out across her lap, wind tugging at the pages. Dozer lay beside her, ears twitching. She looked at a map of the orphanage tunnels, Clarence's note, and a list of unmarked child remains recovered so far. But still no proof of Noah, until she noticed something new. At the bottom of one old intake form, a transfer document, someone had scribbled in pencil, "Moved to storage, 2nd foundation level." A second basement? Her heart slammed in her chest. She grabbed her keys. "Come on, boy," she said to Dozer. "We're not done yet." The map didn't lie. Behind a collapsed wall and a half-century of mold and rot, there really was a second basement beneath Briar Glen. Not listed on any blueprints, not acknowledged in any permits. Jenna Brooks found it late on a Thursday night. With Dozer at her side and a heart full of questions she was no longer afraid to ask. The stairs were narrower here, steeper, designed for utility, not safety. She moved slowly, flashlight sweeping the cobwebbed walls. It smelled like rust, mildew, and something older, something forgotten on purpose. At the bottom was a room she could only describe as clinical. Cement floors, no windows, 4 locked storage units with steel doors. One was marked B12. She stopped. Dozer sat beside her, tail still, ears high, body tense. Jenna took a breath, then opened the door. Inside, the walls were bare, except for scratch marks. Hundreds of them. And in the far corner, half buried under a tarp and rotted canvas sheets, she found the remains. Small, fragile, wrapped in what looked like a child's blanket. The DNA results would take time, but in her gut, Jenna already knew. She had found Noah. By morning, news helicopters hovered over Briar Glen. The second basement discovery had broken the dam. National outlets arrived in droves. K9 Dog Uncovers Secret Room Beneath Orphanage became the top trending headline for 2 days straight. But Jenna didn't care about the press. She cared about justice. She sat in the coroner's office that afternoon, reviewing preliminary findings. The child in B12 had likely died of dehydration. There were signs of restraint. No official cause of death listed on any record. No record of his removal. Just silence. Jenna leaned forward. How long would a child have lasted down there? The coroner looked grim. 3 days, maybe 4. Alone. No food, no water, no light. Jenna's fists curled at her sides. Someone had sentenced that little boy to die. Quietly. Intentionally. And then they built over him. Jenna needed answers, more than paper records and coroner reports. She needed someone who had lived it. Someone who could speak for those who couldn't. She called Marcy. The line rang 3 times before the familiar voice answered. "Is it Noah?" Marcy asked. "Yes," Jenna replied. "I found him." The silence that followed felt like the air had been sucked from the line. Marcy finally spoke, and her voice cracked. "I always knew. They said he was transferred, but I knew that was a lie. I felt it the night he stopped humming, like something was missing from the air." Jenna said nothing. She didn't have to. They met again. This time not in a diner, but outside the orphanage ruins, where protest signs lined the gate and a small memorial had formed. Teddy bears, candles, photos of missing children with question marks where adoption dates should have been. Marcy stood quietly beside Jenna, a scarf wrapped tight around her neck, knuckles white as she clutched a faded drawing, a crayon sketch of 2 stick figures holding hands. "One's me," she said softly. "The other's Noah. We never met face to face, but we were friends." "How's that possible?" Jenna asked. Marcy tapped her head. "When you're locked away, you find ways to survive. Even just the sound of someone breathing on the other side of a wall can be enough." She turned to Jenna. "But he stopped breathing, didn't he?" Jenna nodded. They stood in silence. Later that night, Jenna was sitting at her kitchen table, files spread everywhere, when her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She let it ring twice before answering. A gravelly voice spoke. "You want the whole story? Come alone. Tomorrow night. Trailer park off County 9, Lot 42, midnight." The line went dead. Jenna stared at the phone for a beat, then looked at Dozer. "Well, partner," she said, "we've come this far." The trailer park was as run down as she remembered from her early patrol days. Patchy grass, rusted mailboxes, porch lights that flickered like warning signs. She parked quietly, left the engine running, and approached Lot 42 on foot, with Dozer at her heel. A porch light clicked on. An old man sat in a plastic chair, oxygen tank beside him, a faded military cap on his knee. He looked up as she approached. "You're Brooks?" "Yeah." He motioned her closer. "Name's Carl. Worked security at Briar Glen from 83 to 89. I got tired of pretending I didn't hear things." Jenna stayed quiet. "I remember Noah," Carl continued. "Quiet kid. Sweet. Staff didn't like him much. Said he cried too much. Made the others nervous." He looked away, jaw clenched. "One night, I was on shift when they brought him down to B12. Said he bit a nurse. Told me to lock the door and forget it." Jenna's voice was ice. "And you did?" Carl didn't flinch. "For a while, but I couldn't sleep. I came back 3 hours later and opened the hatch. He was curled up in the corner, singing to himself." He paused. "It was the saddest thing I ever heard." Jenna swallowed. "Did you help him?" "I tried, brought him water, slipped him half a sandwich, but they caught me. Next day I was reassigned to groundskeeping. They said if I opened my mouth, I'd be buried deeper than that boy." Jenna leaned forward. "Why now?" Carl stared at her, eyes red-rimmed. "Because I'm dying, and that boy deserves better than my silence." He pulled a crumpled envelope from his coat and handed it over. "Every internal memo I stole before I left. Names, schedules, notes. They covered it all up, officer. They knew. The board, the director, even a few folks in City Hall." Jenna took the envelope and stood. "Thank you," she said. Carl looked up. "Find the rest of them, for him." The envelope was a gold mine. Internal emails from the 80s and 90s detailing behavioral containment budgets, off-the-books medical logs, and transfer protocols that never involved child services. Handwritten notes warned staff to avoid paper trails. Multiple entries referenced Problem child number 217, Noah. Jenna read until the sun came up. The orphanage had been treating children like inventory. Quiet ones moved through the system. Loud ones went below. Those who wouldn't break disappeared. But now she had evidence, and a voice willing to back it. She brought everything to the federal investigator she'd been working with, a hard-nosed woman named Elena Vargas, who'd transferred from Chicago after a string of high-profile child abuse cases. Vargas scanned the documents and whistled low. "This isn't just negligence, she said. "This is criminal conspiracy. We're talking about institutional abuse, obstruction of justice, maybe even second-degree murder." Jenna nodded. "And we've only scratched the surface." Vargas looked up. "Let's dig deeper." The memorial outside Briar Glen grew every day. Parents who once considered the place a haven now stood weeping at the gates. Survivors began to speak. Stories poured in of locked rooms, starvation, punishment for wetting the bed, silence for crying. And everywhere one name kept coming up: Noah, the boy who sang in the dark, the boy who never made it out, but whose voice had finally been heard. 3 months after the first discovery beneath Briar Glen, the courtroom in Harrow County was packed. Not just with reporters, lawyers, and court officials, but with people who had waited decades for someone to finally say it out loud. What happened to the children at that orphanage was not a misunderstanding. It was a crime. Officer Jenna Brooks sat in the third row, her uniform crisp, her notepad in hand, and her canine partner Dozer quietly laying at her feet. He was calm but alert, his ears occasionally twitching at the sound of raised voices. The old dog had been with her through every part of this. He'd been the one to find that first hatch. Without him, none of this would have surfaced. And now justice was finally catching up. The prosecution called its final witness, Marcy Ellen Reed. She stepped up to the stand, composed but clearly carrying the weight of something far heavier than words. Jenna watched as the woman sat, straightened her shoulders, and looked directly at the jury. "I was 6 years old," she said. "I was locked in a basement for crying after a bad dream. I stayed there for 4 days. No lights, no food, just silence, except for one thing." She paused, her voice catching. "There was another child in the next room. I never saw him, but I heard him singing, humming lullabies in the dark. His name was Noah." Gasps moved through the courtroom. Marcy looked down at her hands, then back up. "He stopped singing on the 5th night, and I never heard him again." By the end of the trial, 4 former Briar Glen employees, including the former director, were indicted on charges ranging from child endangerment to involuntary manslaughter. 2 members of the orphanage's private trust faced charges related to obstruction and fraud. The state officially launched a full audit of 36 other privately run care homes across Indiana. For Jenna, it wasn't about headlines. It was about Noah. It was about making sure no other child was ever locked away and forgotten just because they didn't fit a mold. 2 weeks later, a quiet ceremony was held in Harrow Creek Park. The city had approved a memorial near the old willow tree at the edge of the playground. Once a dumping ground for leaves and broken picnic benches, notapili of peace and remembrance. A bronze plaque was placed at the base of a new stone bench. It read, "In memory of the lost children of Briar Glen. Your voices were silenced but never forgotten. Dedicated to Noah T. Keller and the children whose stories were buried too long." Jenna stood beside Marcy, who held a small bouquet of forget-me-nots. Other survivors, now in their 30s, 40s, even 50s, stood nearby, some with tears, others with clenched jaws. Dozer sat next to the bench, wearing a special medal on his collar. A small boy walked up, no older than 6, and gently patted the dog's head. "He found them?" the boy asked. Jenna knelt down. "He did. He helped us listen to voices we'd forgotten to hear." The boy smiled. "He's a hero." Later that evening, Jenna was back on her porch, sipping a well-earned bourbon as the sun dipped low over the hills. The sky was gold and lavender, and the world, for the first time in a long time, felt a little bit quieter. She looked over at Dozer, who lay sprawled on the deck, watching the breeze move through the trees. "You ready to retire, old man?" Dozer thumped his tail once, then rolled onto his back with a lazy groan. "You've earned it," she said. Inside, her living room looked more like a command post than a home. Files, notes, and photos still covered one table, but next to them, on a small wooden stand, was a cassette tape. The label read, "For Noah." Jenna had found it in a forgotten storage box during the final forensic sweep of Briar Glen. The handwriting was shaky, childlike. She'd waited weeks to play it. She finally slid it into her old cassette player and hit play. A faint hum crackled through the speaker. Then a small voice. "Hi, Noah. It's me, Marcy. If you can hear this, I'm okay. I hope you are too. I know they said we're not supposed to talk, but I'm scared, and I miss you." Another pause, a shaky breath. "So, I'm going to sing the song you sang to me. Maybe it'll help." Then the girl began humming. Simple, soft, slightly off-key. A lullaby in the dark. Jenna blinked hard, throat thick. The tape clicked off. The silence after was the loudest thing she'd ever heard. The next day, Jenna submitted her final report. Case: Briar Glen Orphanage. Status: closed. Notes: criminal convictions issued. Memorial constructed. All unclaimed remains to be interred with names or symbols provided by surviving witnesses. She left one section blank, closure, because she wasn't sure that ever really came. But she did know that stories, real stories, had power. And that maybe, if enough people heard what happened, the next Briar Glen would never be allowed to exist. 1 month later, Dozer officially retired from duty. The department held a small ceremony. Kids from the local elementary school drew thank-you cards, some of which featured the dog with a cape. Jenna gave a short speech, her voice cracking only once when she said, "He didn't just find a room, he found the truth." Afterward, they presented her with a new canine puppy, barely a year old, floppy ears, curious eyes. "He's got big paws to fill," one officer joked. Jenna smiled. "We'll go easy on him, for now." But she knew her fight wasn't over. Not really. There were more homes, more files, more children whose names had disappeared into boxes and basements. And she wouldn't stop until every last one of them had a voice again. That night, Jenna sat on her porch once more, now with the new pup curled up at her feet, and Dozer snoring nearby like a lawnmower winding down. She pulled out her phone, opened the video app, and started recording. "If you've been following this story, thank you," she said. "We set out to find out what one canine dog discovered in a basement, but we found something bigger. A broken system, forgotten lives, and people who fought to keep it all buried." She took a breath. "We also found courage in a little boy who wouldn't stop singing, in a woman who never forgot his voice, and in a dog who knew somehow where to dig." She smiled, tears shining. "So here's our question to you. What stories from your hometown deserve to be heard? What truth is still waiting to be uncovered? Comment below, share this story, and don't forget to subscribe to Heroes for Animals, because sometimes the ones who can't speak are the ones who tell us the most."